Okay.
A very good afternoon to all of you. We are joined by a very distinguished panel of speakers this afternoon. On behalf of the Indian International Center, I extend a very warm welcome to all of you. The session is being chaired by Shri Gurcharan Das, who though needs no introduction. Shri Das is an author and former CEO of Procter & Gamble India and Managing Director, Procter & Gamble Worldwide Strategic Planning. A prolific writer, he has several books to his credit. Author of a much acclaimed trilogy based on the classical Indian ideal of life's goal, India Unbound, was the first on Artha material well-being, filmed by the BBC. The second, the difficulty of being good on dharma or moral well-being is a contemporary meditation on the epic Mahabharata. And the third one is on the riddle of desire. Sri Gurcharan Das studied philosophy at Harvard University and later attended Harvard Business School, where he is featured in 3 case studies. Welcome, sir. And now over to you to take the session forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Usha. So, welcome to this webinar to launch Rajni Sibal's book, Haunting Himalayas. It's about ghosts and spirits and the Himalayas. Now, I don't believe in ghosts during the day, but I'm more open-minded during the night. Although I must confess, I have seen ghosts lurking around the India International Center during the day and at Khan Market during the evening. Joining me are 3 very distinguished persons. It's Shormistha Panja, who is Professor of English, University of Delhi. She is the author of 10 books on Shakespeare, visual culture, and Indian feminism. Wow, 10 books. Then we have Richa Mishra, who is the senior associate editor and bureau chief of the Hindu business line. That's the business paper of the Hindu. And last but not least, we have the author of the book, Rajni Sekhri Sibal. This is her 6th book, but the first collection of her short stories. Her earlier publications include 2 anthologies titled Clouds, End and Beyond, and Fragrant Words, the first one published by Wisdom Tree and the second by Bloomsbury. Rajni was an IAS officer who retired recently and as secretary to the government of India. She's of the 1986 batch and is the first lady to have topped the Indian Civil Service. Wow. Now, Rajni says, and let me quote what she says. She says in her book that as a student of science, I only believed all that I could see for myself, or all that could be substantiated. Over the years, I realized that the only valuable knowledge I ever possessed was that I knew so little. Now, she goes on to describe how she got interested in the transcendental and the world of spirits and the ghosts. Rajni has, I'm afraid, left me far behind because I still don't believe in spirits and ghosts, but I do believe in the Himalayas. Not only do I believe in them, I love them. And I say, thank God for the Himalayas. But, and let me also tell you what Rajni has to say about the Himalayas. She says that the picturesque, and I quote her, the picturesque Himalayan ranges form the perfect backdrop to the short stories of this book. The pine trees and the purple hills lend a delicate fragrance to the tales. A moon that hovers just above one's outstretched arm imbues an ethereal quality to the environs. The mountains are pristine, the air is rare, and the star studded sky heightens the imperceptible realms that we know so little about. Then she talks about frosty mornings, rosy sunsets. I mean, this is unfair. Here we are, locked down by this wretched virus in the heat of the plains. And she's talking about pristine mountain air. And anyway, it's adding salt to the wounds at this time. I'm sure a lot of people are watching this seminar just so they can feel that air and maybe a few spirits on the way. My wife actually does believe in spirits, and she finished Rajni's book in one sitting. I think of ghosts essentially as unfinished business. I mean, it's an unfinished business. Somebody who wanted to take revenge in life couldn't, who comes back to take revenge. It's about the death of a loved one. And ghosts and spirits say more about the people who cite them than about themselves. I mean, we will, Shormistha will perhaps tell us, but Banquo's ghost says more about Macbeth, and Hamlet's father's ghost tells us more about Hamlet. Anyway, I'm not going to stand in between you and this wonderful book, and so I'm going to invite first the author of the book, Rajni, Sibal, to tell us between 5 and 7 minutes. She'll speak about the book. Then Shormistha will take over from her, and she will tell us a lot about the theory of ghosts and about Shakespeare and many things. And Richa has her favorite story that she's going to go deep into. And we all better get ready when Richa comes on, because we'll be ready to get scared and thrilled. So off you go, Rajni.
Thank you, Gurcharan. Uh, Thank you, everybody, for being there. I believe we're a large audience, 780 odd, which is wow. Thank you for being there, everyone. Welcome to my world of the Haunting Himalayas. This is what the cover looks like. So before I even begin, I'm going to say thank you to Uma, my friend from school, my batchmate, who's actually painted this especially for my book, and TK Manoj, who's done the frontispiece. Um, where did this book begin? Now, I think Gurcharan said very clearly and told you that, a lot of us have this whole feeling that, especially if you're a science student, and which I was, um, that I do not believe anything that I cannot see with my own eyes, and your truth is possibly, just something that I'm not too certain about. I think over time, I've realized that that's not true. It's not true at all. I've stopped putting somebody else's truth through a litmus test of empiricism. And I kind of find that all the tales, the stories that I've heard over the years, because I grew up in the Himalayas, I have my parents were in Dalhousie for a while, and then I studied in Dehradun, and again up in Missouri again, as you will read when you see the book. Uh, a large number of people somehow told me, and who I want to in fact thank as I go on. Stories that I think date back to my school. And first of all, Mrs. Madhuri Mathur, who was a teacher at school. One of the stories is totally based on her mother-in-law, Mrs. Kailaj Kumari Mathur, who saw the headless soldier in 1938. Now, I've taken the liberty to take it from where she saw it in the hills elsewhere to Missouri, which I'm more familiar with, the Camel's Back Road. And I've done that with a large number of tales. In fact, all the 8 tales that are there in this exquisite if I may say so myself. Enigmatic, definitely. Enigmatic, ethereal collection of short stories actually portray a mix of myth and fantasy, where the myth does not take away from the actual truth. Because the core is true. The story is absolutely true, but I've changed names. For example, in the story Tobacco on a Rock, Mr. Thaplial from Palkot is named Satyavachan Thaplial in my book, but Mr. Thaplial was actually Ruchita's father, Ruchita Trivedi's father. His real name is Mr. Satya, not Mr. Satyavachan, Mr. Satya Prasad Thaplial. So changes like that, conversations that are built in. Um, I do need to say that there is something about the Himalayas that haunts me during this entire period of COVID, especially since I've just come out of the quarantine. In fact, my son and I were in quarantine till yesterday. Uh, I think my heart just lies somewhere there, and I keep going back to those wonderful evenings when it's dark and cold and it's snowing outside, and you sit either with a beautiful book in your hand around the fireplace or with family and try and tell stories that are enigmatic and inexplicable. Then they used to bewilder me because a lot of them were perplexing, you know. But over time, I've kind of understood that there is much more to the world than meets the eye. There is much more. There's a realm, there's a fuzzy realm out there, which is ethereal, which is somewhere that I do not understand. And I've reached a stage in life where what I don't understand, I do not shun. I like to look at it. And that's the reason I went back to not just the stories in school. There was in the 70s, I'd gone to the Minjar Mela in Chamba, where I'd heard the story of Champavati from the Chela of Vijay Thakur, the Chela of the Champavati temple, and put together some historical facts that was shown to me there, and put it here with the tinkling anklets, which is a tale that fascinated me all through, because even when I was in school, I found that some of the girls had heard tinkling anklets, you know, in Nasreen, the old building of Wellham Girls. In fact, Anjali's mother had lodged a formal complaint. Similarly, as when I went back to Missouri to teach, I found that someone who was my neighbor, Kavita Bahuguna, so the story titled "The Fakir Who Followed Me" is entirely her story. It's entirely what she had told me. I didn't believe it then. I kind of looked at her and asked things, but I do now. Because I think the truth that somebody else has seen, experienced, perceived, as Rajesh Khanna told me, he'd done somewhere up in the hills in Rani Khet. And then there is this other story that is about the Parsi family. I'm not naming them because for sensitivities, but they still mourn the death of their young 6-year-old in the Mulberry House tale. One of my favorites is definitely the story about how the poignant pain of a mother's love who was separated from her son for 4 long years. You know, this child went to school at age 6. She's able to convey her love and somehow reach out to the child across the Himalayas, from Lahore Spiti, a small village in Lahore Spiti, all the way to Missouri. I want to just end here because I find that's what my time allows. But what I do want to say is that I find that the Himalayas have a certain magnetic attraction for anyone who spent any time there. And there is also this wonderful thing about the air being rare and, you know, a moon that just kind of hovers above. You kind of feel that you can reach out and touch it. And the star-studded sky, that things that you cannot understand, things that are beyond one's ken in the city, become more explicit. Your senses are definitely heightened. You're able to sense things better. And I think that's why this book is an ode to the Himalayas. It's also an ode to the wonderful people I've met there, the beautiful people who who related their own experiences to me, their sensations, their feelings. Malini Shankar, who went on the Parvati valley, and this Ishmaeli Meme Sab is basically a story of herself told to me by Vikram. So I invite you to read them. I don't think I'm doing justice within 5 minutes of the stories, but what I do intend to do at some point of time is for those who, especially the ones who are visually impaired, we're trying to put together an audio book for them, short stories being told by each one of us. Thank you. I'll come back to this during our discussion.
Thank you, Rajni. And now I'd like to invite Shormistha Panja. She's the Shakespearean scholar, and let's hear from her about this book.
Thank you, Gurcharan. I'm not going to talk too much about Shakespeare, but I just want to say a few things about the genre that Rajni has decided to pick up in her book of short stories, the ghost story. So, the ghost story can be both comic and also be a moral tale. A comic example would be Noel Coward's play Blithe Spirit, where the dead first wife of a playwright keeps haunting him even after he's remarried. It could also be moral, as in Charles Dickens's Christmas Carol, where Scrooge is visited by these three ghosts. Now, M.R. James, who was one of the popular ghost story writers of the golden age of the ghost story, gives us a few characteristics of the ghost story. He says there should be a pretense of truth. That's the first characteristic. And we see in Rajni's book that she has almost 3 pages of acknowledgements where she actually talks about the sources of each and every single story, about it being recounted to her by people who had actually experienced it or heard about it from a close family member. The ghost story, James tells us, also should have a pleasing terror. In one of the stories about a fakir, the mother-in-law of the narrator tells her that strange is not always bad. And that's why I think, apart from the Mulberry House Magnet story, all these stories do please us, even though they're about ghosts and spirits. They are not uncanny or terrifying or horrific. The whole book is a very, very pleasant read. Also, James says that there should be no gratuitous violence or sex. In fact, there's, not just gratuitous, there's no violence or sex in any of these stories. In the last one, we are told there's a hint that some kind of an emotion may have developed between the widow and, the person who serves her, but nothing is elaborated upon. James also tells us there must be no explanation for these uncanny events. So that's why we never find out in the fakir's story how the red fur-lined coat of the narrator manages to find its way back into her cupboard. We don't know how the child is pulled in the Mulberry House Magnet story against gravity rather than in accordance with gravity. James's last point is about the setting. He talks about winter storms, twilight, moonlit nights. This moonlit nights are it's a recurring trope in Rajni's stories. The setting can be the jungle, it can be the mountains, it can be the heath, it can be a haunted house, as in the last Headless Horseman story, which is set in the haunted Rawlings Manor. We have a story set in a palace, the Tinkling Anklet story, and the Fakir story happens on a moonlit night. And I'd like to add one point to these, an additional point: the pretense of truth, the pleasing terror, the no gratuitous violence or sex, no explanation, and the setting. I'd also like to add that a really successful ghost story always moves from the very mundane and the ordinary to the extraordinary. All right, you have to begin with absolutely everyday characters and settings, and only then, by way of contrast, what happens next can that really be effective. So that move from the normal to the paranormal, I think, is very, very crucial. Now, the history of the ghost story, there are Greek and Roman legends about ghosts. In the Renaissance, as Gurcharan mentioned, we have Hamlet's father's ghost in Hamlet. We have Caesar's ghost in Julius Caesar talking to Brutus. We have Banquo's ghost appearing in the banquet scene in Macbeth. We have Kid's famous ghost in the Spanish tragedy. But it was not till the Romantic era that the ghost story really gained prominence, with Gothic novels like The Castle of Otranto, which was a huge bestseller written by Horace Walpole in 1764. We have Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which also deals with paranormal activity. Now, the golden age of the ghost story is between 1830 and the beginning of the First World War. That's in 1914. And we have authors like Edgar Allan Poe, Sheridan Le Fanu, an Irish author, M.R. James, whom I've mentioned earlier, the American novelist Henry James with his Turn of the Screw, if you remember, and of course, Charles Dickens. And in India, some of you may recall Rabindranath Tagore's Hungry Stones or Kudito Pashan, which has been made into a film. His Monihara or The Lost Jewel, which has also been made into a film by Satyajit Ray. Shishendu Mukhopadhyay, a contemporary novelist, his Goinar Baksho or The Jewelry Box was also made into a film by Aparna Sen. And of course, the famous Chaubali by Vijay Dan Detha, Rajasthani short story, which has spawned both Manikal's Duvida as well as Shah Rukh Khan and Rani Mukherjee's Paheli, which is about the ghost coming back to a woman in the guise of her husband and being so much more affectionate and loving than that husband ever could be. So, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about ghost stories. Now, to talk about Rajni's stories, as I said earlier, she writes in a really pleasing style. I think one of the stories that impressed me the most was the story about the fakir, where the atmosphere is created through the sense of smell. I found this very unusual, that there is the fragrance of pine forests sort of carries the reader along in this very gentle story where a fakir and a young girl help each other through the sharing of this warm coat, which has just been presented to the young girl, and the fakir seems to somehow help this girl on her tortuous path to the upper Himalayas, to Gangotri. I found that to be a very moving story. And the other story was the Mulberry House Magnet, because it talks about a real loss, the loss of a small child. And I think even more than the paranormal and inexplicable events that are mentioned in that story, I don't want to spoil the story for you, is that real sense of sorrow that the sister of that child feels. Rajni, I think, communicates that with great sensitivity as she recounts the story of her brother's death, even after the passage of so many years. So the book is a really pleasant read. Like Gurcharan's Wife, you can just pick it up and finish it at one setting. None of the stories are terrifying. Young children, I think, can read them. Rajni has an extremely pleasing style. And I would recommend all of you, all the 700 odd people who are attending this webinar, to get a copy of this book. Thank you.
Thank you, Shormistha. That Rajni, you'll be very happy if 700 people out there. A webinar is a bit like a ghost experience also, because we don't know who these lovely 700 people are. They're in some kind of ghostly reality. Anyway, Richa, over to you now.
Hi. I'm like amazed at the introductions, but I thought Mr. Gurcharan Das would say that the host here is Richa because she's from the media. We are supposed to be the worst ghosts around. But before I, pick on the Rajni's book, there's something personal which I would like to share. And this is like my first meeting with Rajni, which I had. And the Rajni I met, and my first impression was, oh my God, here I meet a typical Babu. I don't know when that Babu became such a beautiful narrator to me over the years. Maybe I'll sit with Rajni and chat it out and talk about it. And uh, ghost spirits, the place where I have grown up from, they do exist in people's mind, in people's world. And the major portion of my life I have spent across Vindhyas, where again there is a strong identity with these beings, I would say, because I really don't know in what form and what shape they are. My early romance with nature actually started with when I got wholly addicted with Wordsworth and his work. So when I started reading in the midst of, covering the ruckus of politics and economics and doing number crunching and the corporate world, Rajni came out with this beautiful book. And prior to this, of course, I had read her poetry, and I was like, wow, here's someone who speaks straight from heart. So as I went through her books, and one which story which I really want to share here today was the first story of the book, that is called Ishmaeli Memsa. And before I talk further, I want to talk about this story. It's very important when any reader picks up a book how attractive you are in the first few sentences. As a journalist, we are told that if you cannot connect with your reader in that 150 characters, you have lost your reader. So Ishmaeli Memsa actually made me read the next story, the third story, the fourth story, and so forth. It is simple, it is straight, and it's a story which all of us have heard as we have grown up. And there are few, portions of the book which I have actually picked out, and which the previous panelist also commented on the role of the nature and how nature is depicted. There's this portion where it says, "My path was lit by a whimsical moon that played hide and seek with the clouds. I must have walked for half an hour before I came to a rickety looking wooden bridge. The bridge spanned the river about a kilometer and a half upstream from where we had pitched our tents." I could actually visualize what she was saying. It brought out the picture. Okay, so this is what it is. A book has to have a certain kind of cinematography so that it's taking you to that surreal world which you don't see, but you're reading it. I'll go ahead with the next bit which I have picked up. No one slept that night. The next morning, we curtailed our trek and decided to go home, back to Delhi. With the mountains behind us, it all seemed like a dream. My friends often wonder whether we had imagined it all. I do too, until I see the wells on my wrist. I'll come back to what each meant as we go on in the discussion, but one more which I want to read and which I picked up. Even as life goes on, I go back to that night in Harsal, in the Himalayas in my dreams, and I wake up in a sweat. Ishmaeli Memsa, the lady in white with no face haunts me. Isn't the war over yet? Where is my Bonisa? Bring back my Bonisa. Now, why I have picked these up, I'll quickly like to sum up before my time gets over. A narrator is there. In Hindi, we say a sutradhar. So a narrator is there who's narrating the story of Ishmaeli Mingsa to young people who've gone trekking. It's a beautiful story. It doesn't have any flamboyance. It's a normal story which every village, almost every village has a story like this. But what touched me the most was life, even as life goes on. So there was something I wish the character would have given me a little more on how it affected her. There was something which hit her, and I would definitely like to know this more from Rajni. For me, this book was a relief because long forms are thing of day, and very few people are actually writing short stories. And it's very important in a short story to have threads, which is weaving all your stories in this book, in the book. And here she has done it very beautifully. These were my few takes on her book, and as we go forward, over to you, Mr. Das.
Seven, 10 minutes maybe. Let's see how long we want to chat with each other. Let's talk amongst ourselves about what we have said so far, and then turn it over to the audience. And there might be some questions, and Usha ji of IIC will help us by reading those questions. Let me kick off by saying I was struck by what Shormistha said about the films, particularly Manikal's film Duvida, which I think is an exquisite film set in Rajasthan about a very attractive ghost. In fact, the ghost is far more attractive than her husband. And this was the point you also made. And is this something that, is it a ghost? Often the idea of a ghost, Rajni, in your stories, is there one where it's the desire? As I said, very often um, the ghost, the story tells you more about the person rather than the ghost itself. But the point here being that, is this a common desire to have a ghost who's a very attractive human being that we would like to sort of continue um, uh, interacting with? What do you think? Any of you um, can can jump in on this one?
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, Richa.
So yeah, Sharmishta's ones were very interesting indeed, and there have been many movies. The movie you mentioned, and Paheli, she mentioned
Maheli.
about Paheli also, Shah Rukh Khan's. Now, why I feel that sometimes, thank God she did not mention the Ramsey brother movies, because they were also ghost stories, and they were like really scary and haunting to everyone. But why I'm picking on these is, these are sweet romances which you see in the stories, and,
Yes.
and after the life which we lead, it, the little romance, the little happiness which we see around us, maybe we decide to cling on. Sometimes it may be a figment of imagination. You two people can correct me, or Rajni can correct me. But somehow we tend to believe that the ghosts are there for real, and they are like people who are guiding forces. I don't know. I mean, I just want your view on this.
Rajni, what?
Yeah, so may I come in here? Richa, I think you've kind of said it because in one of the tales, Shormistha picked that up. That's the one, the fakir who followed me. I think it's the desire of the protagonist. Kavita was the actual protagonist. Where what happens in the hills, because this is Joshimath, just below the Badrinath hills. Uh, Most of the men go out to work. So the father-in-law works in Dehradun in a factory, just outside Dehradun, and the husband is in the army. So straight after she gets married, within about 2 weeks after she gets married, the husband goes off and so does the father-in-law. And this whole big Haveli kind of house, which is so old that an entire story of 5 rooms is kept locked, has just 2 women, the mother-in-law Ammaji, who you quoted, Amma who said that, well, everything that's strange is not bad, and the protagonist, they were alone. So that is young girl of about 17 years of age. I think I don't know what the fakir was, because I even then wonder, maybe it was a figment of imagination. Maybe it's the kind of a desire to have someone who's close by to turn to, someone you don't have to wait for annual leaves to happen. Could be that. I don't know. Don't know.
Right, right. Shormistha, you were going to say something?
Well, the fakir is seen as a very protective presence. We don't usually associate ghosts with being protective. So he is not interested in harming her or scaring her, and that wonderful sort of give and take between the two characters. Because when she sees him meditating in the freezing cold, she goes and puts her new coat around his shoulders, so that he will be warm. So that kind of, as Rajni said, that we shouldn't dismiss the things that we can't logically or empirically explain too easily. And perhaps the Himalayas is a region where you have this sort of liminal world, where the human and the non-human can sort of reach out and hold hands, because it's not like the busy, chaotic plains. So, yeah,
Yeah.
So may I just end with one quotation from I like to read a very small piece on behalf of all the protagonists, the heroes and the heroines of my book. As you turn the pages to read, on behalf of the protagonists of all the arcane stories presented in this book, I would like to quote something a character states in one of the tales. And I quote, "I can understand how incredulous all this sounds to you. I don't know what to say. Well, I saw it with my own eyes, and I still do not comprehend." Unquote. So,
Very nice.
thank you.
Very nice. So now shall we give a chance to the audience to ask any questions of any of us who have spoken, and particularly of you, Rajni, the author, the star of the show today. So, Ushaji, will you come on and tell us if there are any questions, any thing that's worth we can talk about?
Yeah, there are several comments actually, and one of the comment is from the marketing point of view. I thought that before reading the question, I must share this with you. Is asking the address from where we could get the book. It's Professor Sunita Mittal. She wants to know from where we can purchase the book. Okay, so I thought marketing point is also very important. Yes, there is a question which
Before
is
answer, Usha, let's answer the question. It's available on Amazon, right?
Yeah, so it's available on Amazon. It's available on Amazon.
Amazon. Okay.
Okay, let's move on.
Well, yeah, there is a question from Mr. D.P. Tripathi who says this book is very well written, simple and easy to understand, and interesting. What motivated the author to write this book?
Wow.
Okay.
So, well, that's obviously for me. May I take it? Uh, what motivated me to write? Let me be frank. During the COVID kind of coincided, the lockdown coincided with my retirement. And for the first 4 odd days, I felt it a loss. After 18 hours of work and suddenly you're at home, you're not allowed to even go out for a walk. So I started to write another book that's going to be coming out soon. It's a non-fiction. It's titled Officers and Women of Substance, but more about that later. Uh, that book was a tough one because it needed a lot of research and going back to the field and so on and so forth. Um, as I lay one night, I just, as I said, I often go back to Tapovan is where I begin the story from, and sometimes up to various places. Tharkidun is another, places that have stayed with me. So I was just thinking of those, and I thought of all the tales that I had stored up in my mind long ago, and I started to write. And I'd like to share that there were occasions when my children had to literally, tell me, "Mom, what are you doing? It's 3 o'clock at night. You've got to stop." I would just wake up, have coming back from some, altitude up in, let's say, Gomuk or way up in Tapova at some point of time. And I think I used to get lost. I loved writing it. I enjoyed every minute of it. And I think that I hope you will enjoy reading it too.
Next.
Yeah, there is a question. I think Rajni ji must be knowing this chap. Raju from Mumbai. He's from Resource W4 by 7. He says, in such genres, there is temptation to succumb to veracity of descriptions and characters. Did you feel anything of that sort?
Sorry, I didn't understand that.
It says, in such genres, in this kind of environment, there is temptation to succumb to verbosity of descriptions and characters. Did you feel anything of that sort?
Yeah, I think you've caught me there because I am a poet. So when I start thinking of the mountains, in fact, I can quote from one of my books at a later stage about how I feel that I need to throw open the windows of my heart when I see clouds coming in, during a Masuri monsoon. So I tend to describe nature. I tend to write more about the atmosphere, bring more in. I had to, in fact, do it in a very succinct manner. I had to sit down and take off a lot of the nature bit of it, not so much the characters, but the background. I really had to do that. I had to edit it very seriously.
Yeah.
Always good to edit. Always good.
Well, rest are all comments actually.
Okay.
Well,
I think we've had a very nice discussion, and if all 700 people decide to go to Amazon, I think, Rajni, you'll be in good shape. And let me just say in closing that that I actually have encountering, although I don't believe in ghosts, but I've been encountering ghosts of a different sort in this 4 or 5 months of COVID period. And because I've been working on Penguin for many years, had been asking me for an autobiography. And so I had written 3 books of the trilogy that Usha had described. And this is the 4th, which is Moksha. But I have a very unusual take on Moksha because I'm an agnostic. And so what I've been doing as a part of the autobiography is actually reliving my past. And I find that in reliving my past, I have been actually reliving the past is superior to having lived my life. And that's because we tend to select. We tend to select the nicest moments. And so the work is ultimately a work of some kind of invention. And the fact is that memory is a great producer of ghosts. And so, what I've been encountering in this period are the ghosts of one's memory. And these, whether they are sometimes very happy ghosts, sometimes they're very unhappy ghosts, but they're ghosts nevertheless. And so, actually, the world we live in is basically an invented world. Even the life, even a moment. You remember that famous movie of Kurosawa, where an event is seen by five different people and they tell five different stories. Exactly, exactly. So, in the same way, I think that and the more am reliving my life, the more find that actually life itself. And so the difference between the ghostly world and the real world is not so very different, you know, because so much of our world is inside us and it's an invented world. Uh, and we are very often invented human beings, just as I believe nations are invented. Also, nations are invented communities, imagined communities, and so we shouldn't put too much into, Hindu Rashtra or uh, Islamic Pakistan or Kashmiriyat. All these things are invented, and so are we. So maybe that's a good place to end our.
May I just, as you end, Gurcharan, may I say something on the same line out of the book? It's just one
Yeah,
line that says that there is a fuzzy realm that separates the here and now from all that is out there in the ether. It's very fuzzy. Namaskar.
right. That's a very nice way to end our session. Thank you all. Thank you, Richa, Rajni, Shormistha, and Usha.
Thank
And all
Thank you,
you
Vimya.
viewers, thank you for coming to listen to in this ghostly manner. Listen to us in this webinar. So bye bye all.
Bye bye.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
Thank you.
you. Yeah, we
Thank
still have 10 minutes actually. We still have 10 minutes to
I
go.
know it's
So,
better to. I've always believed less is more, Usha, and so.
okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, all of you. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.